Carson, Leno, Fallon. Now, it's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, about to have a conversation with Jamie Griffiths about wine in Ohio. Introductions in just a moment. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for podcasting. Hey, have a listen to Bettina Kurz. I just had a conversation with her a couple days ago. If you wanted to buy a winery, particularly in Europe, this is the woman you would talk to. She's a mergers and acquisition specialist for wineries only and vineyards all over Europe, Italy, Spain, Germany, France, where you name it, Burgundy, Bordeaux. Fabulous conversation. May change your mind as to whether you actually want to do this or not, because this is a tough racket. Hey, have a conversation. We're going to have a conversation with Jamie Griffith. Now, you go by Jamie Griffiths, Jamie Griff Wine.
That's correct.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul.
Easy for me to say. I wanted to have this conversation. You and I spoke off camera before, but I wanted to delve into the influencer side of marketing. We're going to talk about social network marketing. We're talking about Google Analytics, things like that. But I wanted to sort of touch on this idea of influencer marketing, because I think in the chatter in our industry and other industries as well, the idea of getting involved with an influencer who has a certain number of followers, and then they have micro-influencers, which is less number of followers, to influence a purchasing decision by a consumer. Wine would be a natural, it seems like, for this kind of product. But tell me about that trek. I mean, what happened that you became a wine influencer? And then we're going to talk about my opinion of this.
There you go. I retired from corporate America just a couple of years ago. When I had set my retirement date, I didn't know it was going to be in the middle of COVID. So I was kind of bored. Mm-hmm. My son had done pretty well. He had actually built up a TikTok presence of a couple 100,000 followers. And
wow.
Again, I was kind of bored sitting around going, gee, I wonder if anybody would be interested in learning about wine on TikTok. I kind of incorrectly had the idea that the demographics were only youth. And I was very wrong about that. My analytics will tell you it's a much older group. A lot of more people have kind of transitioned that way. But I was looking for something to do to be creative, and I had always collected wine. That's my wine cellar behind me. And when you're in the wine business, or when you're not in the wine business, I think you tend to go to wines you like. I was a big Napa Cab, a big Chateauneuf-du-Pape Rhone Valley fan, and that was kind of what I drank almost always. So one of the things I thought, well, if I start doing some education, it'll force me to hone my skills and reread up and re-educate myself. So I kind of did this out of boredom in the house during the end of COVID. And then I threw a few videos out with some good advice from my son, and it just kind of, it stuck. And it's been great, because I think I learn as much about making the videos as the content that I send out, because one of the worst things I could do is put something out there that's not accurate, or pronounce something incorrectly. And so I'm always just very cognizant to make sure that I am putting out quality content. And I do think the nice thing about TikTok in particular, it's short format. So it's 1-3 minutes. And I think the attention span of a lot of people, if they can learn something in 1 or 3 minutes, they do it. So I just kind of did it not to make money. I did this, frankly, just for me to have something to do. And again, it's kind of, it's worked out pretty well.
Despite your new career, which we'll talk about here, obviously, during the show, but is there an income stream now from your influencer marketing, or is it still a hobby? Or, you know, a lot of influencers receive goods and services, you know, in exchange for airtime, et cetera. But has it turned into a profit center, or is it just still a hobby?
Yeah, it could be. I could monetize this if I didn't have another regular job, which I know you're going to ask me about in a minute. I posted more often. I'm probably only posting a couple times a week. If I did more, and I really wanted to push it and go out and seek deals, I think that I could. That's not what my intent was. So I still try to do more of stuff. I only put stuff out I want to put out. I don't put stuff out that people ask me to put out. And because of that, I probably limit my potential. But I think that's okay, because to me, I treat it more of a hobby, and whatever comes of it's great. I was treated to a trip to Spain this time last year as an influencer, and to me, that's more rewarding. I'm more about experiences, monetary things. So I was in Ribera del Duero a year ago with a group, and that to me is more rewarding than whatever financial things would come out of it. Just to have access, it gives you access to stuff you wouldn't normally have access to. if you were just a wine collector.
It's kind of an interesting path that you took because you're trying to learn yourself and learning about wine. I tell people wine is an endless subject of academia. I mean, you could go forever if you want to become even the masters of wine who've passed this onerous test in these at least 5 years of study will tell you the older ones, older. I don't mean in age, but I mean in tenure. As well as the master psalms will say, it's not even the same test. It's not even the same subject matter as it was, let's say in 1996 when a good friend of mine passed the test, because it's so evolving. And so the subject of wine and the study of wine is a never-ending study. You have to be kind of passionate about it to get to move the needle on this subject. Do you? Man, my mouth. I don't know if it's working today or what, but
no, I think you're right. And I'll add, I think it's kind of a shame that it is. Wine is great. There's so much history behind it. The thing that I say often in my videos is, why do we make wine so complicated? All we're doing is drinking fermented grape juice. So let's make it more approachable. And honestly, that was my whole, part of the reason I got into it is my daughters were in their 20s. They were just getting out of college. They were trying to get away from drinking the seltzers of the world that were out there. And I just said, I wonder if their friends would be as interested to learn about wine as they are. And again, I always just say it needs to be more approachable. It needs to not be so intimidating and scary, because once you get into wine, all the other history and all the other wonderful just backstories with wine and the geographies and the terroir, all that stuff is just so fascinating to me. It's unlike any other, in my opinion, any other drink or food, beverage, anything that exists. Wine just has so much that, yes, there's a lot to learn, but you don't need to know it all. Just enjoy and keep refining it. And that was sort of my approach. And hopefully it comes out that way in my videos.
Well, I think that's accurate in that and the point I was making was that, you can stop and decide whatever you want. There are my friends who love certain wines. They're not interested in learning much more, but they certainly do hang on to things I say and probably fact check me more than they actually believe me. But it's a subject where you can do that. And I think that, and I'm going to say this at the risk of sort of upsetting the industry, I think that the industry itself perpetuates this aristocracy of wine and the intimidation factor. And it's only intimidating, I think, because when you look at it from the outside, there's just a lot to know. And when you hear somebody say, I sense cedar and raspberry and the structure of this wine, you can't relate to that. In fact, this show is not about that. The show is not about swirling, sniffing, and trying to figure out, what's in the glass and act like a big shot when it comes to wine. We don't want that, right? It's funny you said that about your daughters. Are they millennials?
Yeah, they are. Would that be mid-20s? Yeah.
Yeah, I have this funny thing that I bring up, and maybe you can shed some light on it, and that is, they're the generation about biodynamics and organics and, treat yourself better, and it's, what's that acronym for you only go through life once kind of thing, MOFO, whatever. MOFO, that's not it. But then they drink the seltzer, with this sugared up, artificially flavored drinks, and I think I said, what? Where did that come from? But moving them, they have moved away from that.
How is that any different than when we were drinking wine coolers and Mad Dog 2020 back in the day?
I suppose. And so but I do believe this, and maybe that's happened with your daughters, that wine is that beverage you're talking about. It's that ethereal beverage that one day, whether it's when they're younger or older, they have the proper glass of wine, and they're like, oh, this is interesting. Have they had that moment?
One of them has. The other one, I think she's still trying to find it. My younger one is much more into it than the older one is, and I think she did have a couple of experiences. One was I know we were drinking Moo Shiraz, and it was like the first time I think she had a pretty. It was an aged one. I think it was 20 years old. It was like, wait a minute, this is pretty weird. And she was going, do I get asparagus? And I'm like, yeah, you do. It's pretty bizarre.
Wow.
So I think we've all had that moment. Mine was Burgage Hills Chardonnay was, believe it or not, the first wine that was my aha moment. So.
Wow. Do you get a kick out of that happening in front of you, and we'll talk about your business now, but do you find that fun when, as an influencer on TikTok or whatever you're doing, that you get a note or a comment or something like, I get it now kind of thing?
I do. And that's what keeps me going is when you get somebody puts a comment down there, go, I can't believe how much, you've taught me. Thank you so much. I got a card in the mail the other day. Somebody sent to my business because they've kind of figured out where I work. Yeah, that to me, that's more rewarding than getting a million hits on a video. It's the little subtle things that I feel like if I'm influencing or somebody's kind of experiencing that for the first time, because I think we just did a tasting at my shop the other day, and I always say to people, wine tastes so much better when you're with people. I never want to open up a really nice bottle of wine and drink it by myself. I always want to do it with people because I want to see their experiences. I want to go through that experience with them. And I think that's what makes wine such a social thing. And that comment you made about getting somebody to respond, or I've had an aha moment, that in my opinion, that's the same as if you're having a special tasting somewhere and somebody has an aha moment of, holy cow, that's, a life-changing. We overuse that in wine, but the wines that you'll never forget that moment when something truly extraordinary hit you and you made a connection with the wine. And I just, whether it's virtually or in person, that's part of the reason why I now own a wine shop, is I get more out of it when I see it happen in person, because I think we're still creatures of person, individual connections, and you can't sometimes replicate that online. But yeah, for sure. I love those moments when somebody goes, wow, this is different than drinking that seltzer. That's great.
Let's talk about that insanity that you just talked about, which is buying a wine shop. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. Did I say that out loud? You come from corporate America, and I want to start with this angle because it's an important one. The romantic lifestyle of the winery owner, of the proprietor of the vineyard, and all this stuff, and the wine shops. Even as we've been in this business for 35 years. But you came out of corporate America, you were retired, you started wanting to learn about wine yourself, so you started these TikTok videos, which is a great way to learn. I've learned so much about the way I learn by studying wine again, and like I now understand why it's just trouble with school, because the way I learn is different than the way I was taught, right? So here now you get to learn because you stand in front of a camera, like you said, and you want to be accurate. That takes research. And then you have to verbalize all that, and all of a sudden you learned it, right? But so what drove you to buying a shop? I mean, seriously.
Around the same time, I went to a wine shop that's just a couple of miles up the street from me, and it was almost the same time I started doing the TikToks. And I said, hey, can I work here one day a week? I don't care what you pay me. I just want access to the distributors. And the owner at the time said, sure. And then after about a year and a half of working for him, the owner, we were in the middle of some interesting supply chain issues in this country and labor things. And he came to the conclusion he was getting older and didn't necessarily want to keep the store. And we have about 50 employees. And I just said, one of the other guys that was working there was similar to me, retired guy. And we just said, hey, let's sit down and figure this out, because we really like our retirement jobs in the wine shop and we don't want it to end. So we picked it up, and you say it's romantic. It wasn't so romantic when I was putting up a 25 case display this morning with some closeout rosés, and I was trying to get it all ironed out. That didn't seem too romantic. My back's romantic. A little bit sore. My back's a little sore from doing that.
Well, I've said this many times on the show. It's a very tough industry. The margins suck. In California, when I started stocking the shelf of my dad's store in the 70s, the prices were fixed, and I think that's what happens in Ohio too. So your neighboring supermarket cannot sell a wine or distilled spirit less than the fixed price of the MSRP. Is that accurate?
Yeah, they could go higher, but it's a fixed margin. Yes, in Ohio.
And that's what California was, and that's a pretty interesting approach for alcohol, I think, because the internet has created so much consternation in our industry, and we work with such skinny margins as it is that, even when I go to dinner with friends, maybe that happens to you, they take their phone out and let's say I bring a nice wine. You said, I want to drink nice wines with my friends. So you say you bring a Grand Cru Burgundy or, a classified growth Bordeaux, and then your friend takes out this phone and takes a picture of the label and runs it through Vivino or something. Drives me nuts.
Well, people come into the store and that's all they do. They just keep clicking around. They'll go through the aisles and they click and they're just looking for that rating.
So I kind of like the protection that's built into the Ohio system where they can click on Vivino and look at the average price, but it doesn't matter because they can't get it any cheaper anywhere down the street.
That's correct.
I think that's a really unique feature. So here's something that's interesting, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. I went to a tasting not too long ago, and I'll net this out. And I was sitting with 4 other people, 2 of them not in the industry, but huge wine enophiles. I mean, unbelievable stuff I've never even tasted. They're talking about in restaurants around the world. And another gentleman who was a very close friend of the host of the tasting, it was a port tasting. Just to understand the magnitude, this was probably the greatest port tasting in the last 100 years. And one of the greatest port collections, private collections, is here in Southern California. And he opened ports from the 1800s through 2016 of one vineyard in one part of Portugal, of which some of these were the last bottles known to exist. So this was not an inexpensive place. But anyway, the point is, I sat with 2 people that are in the industry, the O'Shaughnessy family, the O'Shaughnessy wines, and these 2 guys that are outside looking into the industry and want so desperately to be part of the conversation, which they totally understood wine. But what have you learned now that you're in that? You got to buy it, you got to market, you got to stack up 25 cases. What have you learned about the inside part of this industry that you didn't expect to see?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I will tell you my aha moment has been, and I referenced that trip to Spain. The thing that's I probably shocks me the most is just the questions that people come in that shows how much they don't understand. The biggest one is probably, I don't like dry, I don't want sweet wine. And then you go, well, everything in here is dry for the most part. So it's just the amount of knowledge that the average consumer doesn't have. Mm-hmm. But the other aha moment every time we do these tastings, and we do tastings twice a week at my store, the palate, the American palate, you always hear this, that the American palate likes these big fruity, over extracted fruit. And that's where a lot of people are going. And when I was in Spain, they were trying to make wines to copy that. And I was so sad about that. So probably if I said the biggest shocker to me is this whole thing you hear about the American palate, sadly, it's kind of true. And it's even worse than I probably thought it was. So that's kind of a depressing thing to think about, but definitely that is I keep trying to get people to try to drink some of the more old world stuff. And you were talking about natural wines, and there's just so many great wines. There's so many great generations have been doing it for so long that I just try to get people to expand outside of the lane of the big, fruity California wines.
I have the same problem. And what do we do about that?
I don't know. I think during tastings, I just try to show them both sides and then just continue to talk through. There's nothing wrong with that style. It's just a different style. I always say drink what you like. So if that's what you like, that's great, but please expand your knowledge, because you'll never, if you only stay, and again, I think that's probably the thing I learned of getting out. I was in my own lanes. I talked about the two areas I had in my lanes. It wasn't until I started to expand my own knowledge, my own palate, my own tastes, and being into doing the TikToks and owning the wine shop forces me to do that. We do White Wine Wednesday every Wednesday. And again, we're doing the wine to the Loire Valley tonight. So it's fun that I'm going to force some people that show up, there'll be 40 or 50, to drink some of the great wines of the Loire Valley. And it's the best way to do it. And then again, for me, the biggest gratification is watching the reaction of them as they go, wow, this isn't just like my big buttery oaky Chardonnay. And I go, exactly. Nothing wrong with your big buttery oaky Chardonnay, but please try some of these. These are pretty wonderful. This is Sauvignon Blanc done right when we're in Sancerre, for sure.
I have this romantic thought that is, let's just take California Napa, for instance. So many of them are just opulent. I'm not going to say fruit forward, but certainly gobs of fruit that are in there. And there's pedigreed things. You're paying $15,000 a ton for grapes, so you end up with a $150 bottle of wine. But it's a style that I'm leaning against, and I think it's because, do you feel like if somebody tastes enough, comes to your store enough, goes to these tastings, experiences the Loire, experiences the Ribera de Duero, that they start to move away from those style of wine? They start to learn that, wow, there's something really interesting about some of these other places?
Yeah, I think for sure. And I think my one daughter I referenced earlier is a great example of that. She's starting to go, wait, there are a little more flavors. There's a little, start drinking some of these earthier aged wines. That's the other thing you'd said. I mean, they will have all kinds of stats that the wine that's bought in your store is, 95% of it's drank within the first week they take it out of your store.
That's
So
true.
we're not aging stuff. We're not doing some of the things. So it makes sense that it's all immediate gratification and kind of the world we live in, but the wine and the wine purchasing has definitely kind of followed that as well.
I just thought of something. The Asian countries, Japan probably being further along in the curve when it comes to consumption of premium wines, and then China, they all seem to start with, when wine becomes part of their culture, with the best stuff, right? The classified growth Bordeaux's or the highest end Napas, and then all of a sudden they realize, there's some other things that are less expensive, that are just as good, that just have much complexity, that take you somewhere else when you drink it. And then I'm thinking, wow, I wonder where America is on that chart, because if we didn't have the Joshes and the Apothic Reds and the Cali Red and all that junk on the shelf, would we be further along in the appreciation of wine and the culture of wine in our society?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think that I think it's a good question. Is that changed the palate, or did the young first time wine drinkers go there because they're transitioning from Coca-Cola, seltzers, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Fruity beers. I mean, fruity beers are the whole. We sell a lot of beer at our place too, and there's just the amount of flavoring and stuff in beer is amazing to me. It's like a whole nother animal for sure.
Well, Weiss-Zinfandel of the '70s, Bob Trinchero, and that brought people to the table. So most of the comments I get when I speak, particularly with winemakers that are a little more, they're not grassroots, but they're not in the front lines of trying to sell wine, will tell you, yeah, we need those wines too to get people to try and taste different things, and let them take you somewhere. And I think that's the main purpose of a glass of wine. And I have this new thing called an honest glass of wine. It's an honest glass of wine. It represents its culture, its own culture. So, I don't know, how are the Armenian wines in Ohio? Have they reached there yet? Because
no, there's not a lot of Armenian. I'm trying to do some more Georgian and Baltic state stuff. So
that's amazing.
It's funny you mentioned that. I had somebody reach out to me, and it's one of those ones I said, yeah, send me some wines because I need to educate myself on Armenian wines.
Yeah.
So send me some. If I like them, I'll do something, with them. If nothing else, it's a good educational thing for people on on TikTok and social media.
I can certainly connect you with that. I've been around the industry for a long time with the Armenians, and I was there in 2006, and it was unpalatable. And the Armenian culture, you have to tell the person they're really good, and and lie through your teeth when you can't even drink the stuff. But there's been some movers and shakers in that part of the world, and they're just trying to make wines, and they're still behind the curve, even though wine's been there for 6,000 years at least, the oldest intact winery ever found. The modern culture of wine and the modern processing of wine has just started. Maybe they're into it 5-7 vintages. Michel Rolland, of the famed enologist from France, would tell you it takes 100 vintages, before you start to realize what you're going to get out. And so that leads me to this. If that's true, which I think it is, then wine should really be representing, after 100 vintages, exactly what it is and where it's from, and the history of the culture that make it. Is that something that you try to impart on people to get their brains thinking?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think about this country, because of Prohibition, we're not at the 100-year mark, right?
Right.
The other thing I think is so fascinating is, for various reasons, I just did a high-end tasting in wines of Chile, and one of the things you realize is they started with Spanish wines, but then eventually, probably impacted a lot by the U.S. consumer, have flipped almost everything over to Bordeaux varietals,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I do think, one of the things that prompted my thoughts when you were asking about all these other, I think the U.S. economy has driven a lot of these other countries to pull out and replace with mostly French varietals, because Italy makes the most amount of wine in the world, but there's not a whole lot of people. There are some now making Sangiovese, but it's not like the amount of Cabernet that's grown in this country or other countries. The French somehow did something that the Italians didn't do, which is crazy because Italy is still, the number one producing country. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of follow the leader, unfortunately, and people go with what's popular. There's a lot of Zinfandel ripped out and a lot of Cabernet planted in California. A lot of Merlot was ripped out after Sideways. I mean, there's all kinds of things that kind of dictate and create certain trends for sure.
Yeah.
And people follow trends. It's crazy to me. I think Merlot is one of the most underappreciated grapes in the entire world. The French get it, but Merlot sits on my shelves forever. It's amazing to me.
Well, having been in the industry when 2004, when the movie came out, and watching the sales plummet, and then trying to buy a Pinot Noir at that time, even the low end Pinots were almost impossible to find. Fortunately, that's loosened a little bit. But the irony of the movie Sideways is that Cheval Blanc at the end of the movie is basically 100% Merlot, at least it's rumored to be, and that's the irony of him. I hate Merlot, but when you want to open a 1962 Cheval Blanc, that's what you're drinking. So from a palate standpoint, from the people that come in, you mentioned that they say, "Gee, I want sweet," or I don't like dry," but they don't understand what dry means. I think one of the issues that we've always had in this industry from the consumer side is like, you don't like dry because why? You haven't had a good dry wine, or you just don't like the dryness because maybe you had a extraordinarily tannic version of a wine, and you don't really know. So when you buy wine at the store, is there a tasting procedure with the wholesalers and the winery reps before it gets on the shelf?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a fine line between, if it's a big name brand, if it's a big Orange Swift, I kind of have to have those, right? And that's great.
Sure.
But then I try to trickle in stuff that not that I don't like Dave's wines, but that's one I just have to have. You have to carry the Prisoner in your wine shop. But I try to then pick ones that I happen to like that I'll hand sell. But it's a fine balance between what's the best to have. Fortunately, I have a lot of space, and I've got about just over 5,000 square feet. So I can kind of balance a little of both, which is wonderful. But yeah, it's funny. I think people think dry when they say I don't like dry wines. I think they get dry and tannic mixed up.
Mm-hmm.
I did a whole episode under that. I think they think dry is the sensation of the bitterness of the tannins. And so I just think it's that trying to work. And plus, think about it. Consumer comes in. You don't want to feel like an idiot. You want to say, you have no idea what you're talking about. That would be counterproductive for what I'm trying to do. But you try to listen, and then one of the things I've just sort of asked is, well, give me a name or a grape or a wine that you like, and then I can kind of that's better for me than trying to answer I don't want a sweet wine, or I don't want a dry wine.
That's a talent.
Try to go with what they know.
It's a talent, and I think from the wine shop, my dad in 1972 or 69 when he bought the store, he was in Southern California at that time. You just bought whatever the guy brought in. So if the liquor guy came in with the Jack Daniel's order and he brought you a Robert Mondavi Cabernet, you just bought it because there was no tasting. And my dad was a pioneer in Southern California in tasting before it went on the shelf.
Sure.
And I think just for you saying, and I regularly tell my listeners, go to the wine shop, talk to the proprietor, talk to the person that tasted the wines, tell them what you like or what you've liked in the past, and they'll be able to guide you to the right shelf and the right bottle to try so that you can expand your palate. Instead of, what chance does a consumer have to walk into a store and look at the shelf talker and say, yeah, this looks like a good idea? Really.
And I have been very big proponent. A lot of my other peers that do TikToks take some of the big box shops and they go, oh, this is the best buy in here, and they do that. You will never see me make a video on that because of exactly what you said. I want people to go to their small, local wine shop that have people like me and my team that can pick and help you select a wine, that they're still going to be there, and you can come in with that picture and go, I love this wine that you picked out for me. Can you pick something like this? I very much encourage everybody, go support your local wine shop. Not necessarily just because it's a good thing to do because you don't want them to die out. Personally, I obviously don't. I think the experience that you have speaking to a wine professional there is so much superior than if you go to a big box store.
Well, I agree with that completely. And it's rare, particularly in the supermarkets in SoCal anyway, to find a department manager that gives a hoot. But the other day I was in a Vons here in Southern California, and I'm shooting a little video, actually. I'm sort of criticizing Cali Red, and had the best shelf spot in the store, and at $9.99 or something. And this woman comes up, young girl. She says, "What can I help you with?" I told her who I was, and I gave her my card. And she goes, and so she was one of the most passionate department managers I've ever met. I offered her a job immediately to come work with me because she really wanted to understand. And you don't get that in the big box stores, nor do you get them in even some supermarkets. So it's interesting, and I want to talk about coming into your wine shop and doing a tasting. When you do your tastings, are we blind? Are we just talking about wines, or is it an open forum? Is there a speech format? Because what happens with me, they turn into pretty big social hour, and you kind of lose attention. You lose their attention eventually.
Yeah, the way we do it is we do twice a week. We have sort of big tastings that end up being more like happy hour. Mm-hmm. We have a big TV in the back where I do a whole write-up on each wine. I usually have a theme, and I talked about the theme we have tonight. And then if they want to follow along and ask us questions, they can do that while they're tasting. But the more rewarding tastings is we try to do a high-end tasting every month. And that's where it's an hour, and everybody, we stop. The theme last week was Carmenere. We drank Montes Purple Angel, which is a treat.
Wow.
And we were just going through I was teaching the aspect and the history of Carmenere, how they thought it was extinct for over 100 years until somebody in 1994 was walking through a vineyard in Chile, and somebody said, "Do you like our Merlot?" And he's like, "That's not Merlot. What is that?" And as you know, the rest of the story, they found out that what they thought was growing Merlot there. So those for me are much more rewarding because it's the people that come, we do reservations. It's a little higher end. Obviously, Purple Angel's pretty expensive wine. And that for me is, we have a subset from our regulars that like to come to those. And those for me are more rewarding. So we try to do I kind of try to appease the masses with just a little bit of attention span. And then if somebody wants to come and learn more, they sign up for a reserve tasting, and I love it because it gives me, a lot of times I can play off of what we do in the store with content that I put out on social media.
Do they care about the Carmenere story? I mean, what happens when you tell that story?
We sold a lot of Purple Angel, and I don't think that Purple Angel that I have, my allocation sat on the shelves for a while. Without knowing that story, that story is what adds to the wine. It's what adds to the experience. And I think, oh yeah, for sure they did. The excitement and the interaction. Oh yeah, that's just a great, that's just an example. That's cool. You'd asked if we do blind. We tried to recreate the Judgment of Paris with 4 wines.
Oh.
And I did, Artemis up against Lacasse on the Bordeaux, and then we did the Chateau Montelena up against a Drouin, a white Burgundy, and we did it blind, and people voted on it, and it was a lot of fun. So we try to do anything to make it exciting, but also retell the stories. I mean, that Judgment of Paris 76 tasting is one of the greatest iconic American stories of all time. It's right there with the 1980 Olympics of hockey team, if you ask me.
It's funny that you still can tell the story, and people, I mean, certainly people in the industry understand it, but in fact, I was with my wife the other night for dinner. We're in Hermosa Beach, which is a beach community here in Southern California, and we love sitting at the bar at a restaurant. I don't know why, we just got a kick out of it. So we sat at the bar, and I had a bottle of Barrett and Barrett with me that I was going to take to a different restaurant, but I didn't open it. Barrett and Barrett is Bo Barrett's and his wife Heidi Barrett, and Bo being the son of Jim, who owned Chateau Montelena or bought it. And she goes, "What is that?" I said, "Oh, this is it." She goes, I was invited, a random woman, never met her before, to the 30th anniversary. And with the Judgment of Paris, the French egg on their face, and many of them lost their jobs, actually, the judges. But they said, well, that's fine, but we're going to last longer. The wines are going to do better in the bottle. And then they retasted in 30 years. And we won again, except it wasn't the Stag's Leap. I think it was Ridge or something. But she was invited. I go, "Wait a minute, who are you that you got to go to this thing?" Because I've been doing this a long time. And she said she used to work for Constellation. So we had a nice chat about that. But you talk about the Judgment of Paris, and are people sort of hanging their hat on this, every word that you say when you tell this story?
I think so. I mean, hopefully I'm charismatic enough to get them. I also try not to go too overboard with some of the information, but Yeah, I think it's I think again, anything that goes on a story, that's a great, that's a great American success story, and I think it's cool. So that's what I mean. I think the wine tasting for me is always part of it, the flavors, all that. But as you said, I'm more interested in that than I'm tasting, berries and wet rock. And to me, it's more about the history and the stories always. I just think those resonate more with, and maybe it's just because I want to tell those stories, but I think that resonates more than the individual flavors in the wine and trying to pick those out, because it can get really boring.
Who's on the
Talking
docket?
about us kicking the butt of the French at their own game.
Yeah, right.
Pretty cool story.
Who's on the docket tonight for the Loire tasting?
Oh, who do we have?
Off top of
It's I got a Chenin, I got a Terrain, and I got
any brands that
like what the first one was. None. They're more lower production ones. None that really anybody will look for. But
that's the interesting approach, because Terrain is a pretty aggressive Sauvignon Blanc, and then you've got Chenin, which is not a well-known grape, and people will sometimes gravitate toward it once they get a chance to taste it, as long as it's not over sugared or over cloying. But it's a very fabulous versatile grape to make a variety of things. So what else when you bought this store? And though you had worked there, right? So you kind of understood shelving and fronting the merchandise, pricing things. What else did you learn about this? Employees, you have 50 employees. That's a ton to manage.
Yeah, it's a wine shop, but then it's got a deli and a produce department, and that's where most of the employees are. It's a small grocery store connected with the wine and beer.
Wow, you really
so learning deli was learning the other side is it's a lot more complex, because you got spoilage. You don't have spoilage in wine, right?
No.
When you buy wines, you don't worry much about spoilage.
Do you have turnover here with this? I mean, we're actually winding down our career right now in the direct to consumer side of the business, and it's been a wonderful career, 35 years of doing it, 20 million bottles of wine at least. But we're finding that the labor pool right now is so difficult to manage and understand. Have you had this issue in Ohio as well?
Oh, for sure. And it's two different ones. The group. So we're about 15,000 square feet. 10,000 is the grocery side, and
that's
then
good size.
Beer and wine is on the other side. And yes, we feel it every day. And I think we have a really great team right now, but it is hard. You try to do all that you can do. We try to give the employees discounts off produce. So we have a lot of, teachers that are working there part-time so they can get discounts for their food, for their family. On the wine and beer side, almost everybody is like, I'm one of the youngest ones. Almost all of them are retired people that just want to be around wine. So what I can offer them is what attracted me to the store in the first place is you're going to come to all the distributor, offsites and whatnot. And they love that, because again, it's just people that I got a retired eye surgeon working for me, and he's got Permagrin the whole time he's working. And I just go, that's perfect. So I just think you have to pick and choose your employees, and sometimes you get, lucky, but yeah, there's no doubt that's a challenge right now in this country for sure.
I have some encouraging news for your eye surgeon employee. There's a master of wine here, Patrick Farrell. He lives in SoCal, and he was an eye surgeon, and something happened with his hands. His ability to do surgery was compromised, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to go study wine." And he became a master of wine. So there's a great career ahead of retired eye surgeons, I guess. I don't know.
He's studying for the WSET too right now, so I'm pretty excited that he's here.
That's great. What do you think of those things? The process of WSET, the Court of Sommeliers, the Master of Wine program. It was too late for me to start when they became popular to do. But I kind of think I've tasted 100,000 wines. I probably picked up something along the way, maybe a couple stories. But is it important for that level of education for your employees, and what do you think about it in general?
I think it's nice to have. I think again, I'm going to do it as soon as things calm down. I'm going to go through the WSET series. Not necessarily because I feel like I need it, but because I want to. If that makes sense. Honestly, I think it'll just help me come up with more creative things on tastings at the shop, or TikToks, to be honest with you. So I will. I'm going to do it for that reason and that reason only. It was always on my list to do. I would have started the process earlier if I hadn't have ended up buying the store.
Well,
Because I would have had
it's
time.
structured academia, right? I mean, it's a great subject. It's a way to sort of parse through all this information that you're trying to impart on your clients, but have it organized and presented to you so that easier to digest and possibly disseminate that information when the time's right. I think they're good programs. I kind of have a little problem with making them instant experts, because really it's not your knowledge base when it comes to this industry. It's the passion it takes to understand what's behind the product. And that's more important, I think, than reading a book and trying to answer a couple of questions. But I could be in the minority in that opinion, but I think it's a great way to sort of organize this study.
I'm a little bit of a Cliff Clavin, if you can know that Cheers reference. I kind of like I kind of like to be a sponge of knowledge and like to just know a little bit about everything. So for me, I do it only because I want to do it. I wouldn't do it because I feel like I need it.
I mean, it's like I have a library here my dad collected books anyway, and he was an academic by trade. He was a pharmacist and a chemist, but latched on to wine and started studying. And I've been through most of them, at least thumbed through them. And I suppose, for sure, the WSET program, for anybody that's listening, is a great way to get organized and learn about wine without having to figure out which books to read first. And gives you a great sort of synopsis of what's going on. And the deeper you get into the program, obviously, the more granular the data gets and the more interesting it becomes. But I have a fun anecdotal story. I was flying home, I think, and I got an email, or it was on the Wi-Fi on the airplane, and I got this thing that said, "Hey, you want to become a master of wine?" I'm like, I answered in my head, "Yeah, sure. Fill out this form." So I filled out the form, and one question I couldn't answer, which was, "Where did you take the prep class?" I'm like, "I didn't take one. You just sent me a Facebook ad. I don't know. What did I take?" And so I took the test. The entry, it's like an hour-and-a-half test. You have to buy 3 wines, taste them, write your notes. And then they give you 3 questions to pick one of them as an essay. They loved my essay. It was kind of interesting. It was a packaging question about wine. They hated my tasting notes. So then I found out that you're supposed to take this 3-day prep class to help you understand what they're looking for when you take the test. But it wasn't part of the curriculum, but whatever. Just it's a difficult program to do it. What's next for you? Another store, more programs, more travel. What's in store for Jamie?
Travel. Yeah, travel. I'm headed to, I just want to travel. I want to experience all these places I've read and learned about. So I feel like I'm way behind. I'm doing Oregon, or I'm doing Willamette Valley and Walla Walla back to back here in a couple of weeks.
Oh, great.
With my business partner. We're going to go together. And I'm excited about that. I don't know. Life is funny, Paul. Life comes at you and you just never know what opportunities are going to create. If you're out there doing stuff that you're passionate about, I think you probably would concur with this. I never intended to buy this shop. I really never intended to be a social media TikTok influencer. Yeah. But you start following your passions and things start coming at you and you go, yeah, that seems like a good idea. That seems like a good idea. So those two have been pretty interesting. I'm sure something will present itself that, I'm in my mid 50s. I got a lot of runway left, God willing. And I think if you just keep following your passions, good things happen. People hopefully embrace my enthusiasm for what I'm doing. And I just think if you're doing that, boy, life's a lot. Retirement was not suiting me well because I wasn't feeding off of things. So this has been a really great release for me.
Life, your enthusiasm is contagious. And I think the more people, and I think the answer to one of my questions was like, how do we change the consumer into sort of giving everything a chance and experimenting with wine? And it comes from this. Unfortunately, I think forever it's been a hand sell to get people into the mix of wine, to appreciate that glass of wine representing some place and some time. And it was put to me by a young winemaker in Armenia, actually. She said, "What other product in the world can you can bring around halfway around the world, put it on the desk and say, this is who we are and this is when we were." And there aren't any other products like wine. And that's that's exciting for me, and that's inspiring to me that you get a snapshot of time in that glass of wine. And it sounds like it is your passion now to relay that information, to pass on that enthusiasm, and get one more person interested in a glass of wine.
No doubt about it. Well said.
It's been, I had my wife thinks, well, we're not going to retire. What are you going to do? I'm like, well, that's true. I'm probably much like Jamie in that, something's going to come our way. I'm working on a TV show pitch right now, which is the stories of wine, not just, and that's why I asked you the question about the Carmenere and the Judgment of Paris, and that I think those are the things that make people, if they want to be inspired, they want to be educated, and they want to be entertained. We all do. And if you can do that around a glass of wine, man, you're killing it.
If nothing else, you're having a lot of fun.
That's right. Well, we're already past 45 minutes, and I really appreciate the time. I know you got a tasting today. Would love to get the list when you're done with this of what you're going to walk through and hear about, because I'm always fascinated to know what's going on in other parts of the country when it comes to wine education and understanding. And we look forward to visiting you in your shop when we get through Ohio the next time.
Cheers, everybody. That's how I end every one of my sessions.
And if you're in LA ever, we'll always have something open. We know that.
Sounds awesome, Paul. Thanks for having me on. I very much enjoyed this.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kalamkarian. Don't forget to subscribe, because there's more great interviews on their way. And of course, all these podcasts are sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, 48 years in business. Don't forget to visit our website, wineofthemonthclub.com. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.